Captain Hainwu pressed his fingers against his tired eyes and looked out at the endless black of space. The stars looked the same as they had for the past 6 months, nothing but tiny dots of light scattered across the darkness like salt on a black table. His cargo ship, the Star Drifter, hummed quietly around him. The sound was so familiar now that he barely noticed it anymore. The ship was old and small, not like the massive vessels that the big companies used to haul cargo across the galaxy. Those ships were shiny and new, with crews of 50 or more people, but Haiyan-Wu flew alone. He had been doing solo runs for 3 years now. Ever since the corporations had pushed out most of the independent pilots like him, the pay was terrible. But it kept him flying among the stars, and that was all he really wanted. He reached for his cup of coffee and found it was cold again. He had forgotten about it while staring at the navigation charts. His current job was simple enough: haul a load of mining equipment to the outer colonies. The equipment was nothing special, just drills and power cells and fabrication units that would help miners dig deeper into asteroid rocks. The job would take 2 weeks and pay barely enough to cover fuel costs, but it was honest work. The communication panel on his left suddenly made a crackling sound. Hayoung-Woo looked at it with surprise. Nothing was supposed to be out here in this part of space. He was flying through a sector that most ships avoided because there was nothing worth finding. Static filled the speakers for a moment, then cleared to reveal something that made his heart skip. It was a distress signal. The universal emergency code pulsed through the static. 3 short beeps followed by 3 long ones, followed by 3 short beeps again. Every pilot in the galaxy knew that sounded meant someone was in trouble and needed help. The signal was weak and broken, but it was definitely real. Someone out there was calling for a rescue. Hin-Woo sat up straight in his pilot seat and turned up the volume. More sounds came through the speakers, foreign words in a language he had never heard before. The translation computer tried to make sense of the alien sounds, but could only manage a few. Scattered words, help and dying and loss, came through clearly enough. The rest was just musical sounds that rose and fell like a sad song. He checked his scanner to see where the signal was coming from. The coordinates appeared on his screen, showing a location deep in an unexplored sector of space. No human ships were supposed to be out there. The area was marked as unknown territory on all the star charts. Something that was definitely not human was calling for help. Hayoung-Woo stared at the blinking coordinates on his screen. His hands gripped the controls tighter. The smart thing to do would be to report this to the authorities and continue on his route. Let the military or the exploration service handle whatever was out there. He was just a cargo pilot, not a rescue worker, and definitely not a first contact specialist. But something about the signal made him pause. There was desperation in those alien voices, something that spoke of fear and hope mixed together. The signal was not just an automated distress beacon. Someone was actively broadcasting it. Someone was still alive out there, still hoping that help would come. He pulled up his cargo manifest and checked the delivery schedule. The mining equipment was not due at the colony for another 2 weeks. He had plenty of time to make a detour and still complete his job. The fuel costs would eat into his already thin profits, but he could manage it. The Star Drifter was built for long-haul flights and could handle the extra distance. The alien voices continued to call through the static. Sometimes they seemed to be talking to each other in quick, worried sentences. Other times they would slow down and speak clearly, as if they were trying to make sure their message got through. The translation computer was slowly learning their language, and more words were starting to make sense. Survivors, the computer said, translating one word. Then children and families, and please help. Ishin-Woo felt his stomach tighten. There were families out there, alien families, but still mothers and fathers and children who were scared and alone in the dark of space. He thought about his own family back on Earth, his parents and his sister, who worried about him every time he took a long-haul job. They always told him to be careful and to avoid taking risks. This was definitely a risk. Flying into unknown space to help aliens that might be dangerous or might not even be real. But he could not shake the image of alien children crying in the dark while their parents desperately called for help that might never come. He reached for the navigation controls and started plotting a new course. The Star Drifter would need to change direction and head toward the source of the signal. It would add 3 days to his journey, but he could still make his delivery on time. The mining equipment would just have to wait a little longer. As he entered the new coordinates, the ship began to turn slowly in space. The stars shifted position in the view screen, and soon they were heading toward a part of the galaxy that no human had ever explored before. The distress signal grew a little stronger as they got closer, and the alien voices became clearer. The translation computer was working hard to understand the language. It had identified several speakers, including one who seemed to be some kind of engineer or technician. The voice was calm and precise, even though it was clearly worried. This alien was trying to explain their situation to anyone who might be listening. Ship damaged, the computer translated. Engine broken and life support failing. Yunwu felt his heart sink. A ship with failing life support meant people were dying slowly. The aliens were not just lost. They were running out of time. Whatever had happened to them was serious, and they needed help soon. He checked his own ship systems to make sure everything was working properly. The Star Drifter was old but reliable, and all the important systems were running smoothly. He had enough fuel for the detour and enough supplies to last for several weeks if needed. His medical kit was basic, but it might help if anyone was injured. The alien signal continued to pulse through space, carrying voices full of hope and fear into the empty darkness, and Wu listened to them as he flew toward their coordinates. He was just one man in a small cargo ship, but he was their only hope for survival. 3 days later, his sensors would pick up something that would change everything he thought he knew about the galaxy. 3 days of flying through empty space had given Han Wu plenty of time to think about what he was doing. Every few hours he would ask himself if he was making a terrible mistake, flying into unknown territory to help aliens that might not even be friendly. Seemed like something only a crazy person would do. But every time he heard those desperate voices calling through the static, he knew he had to keep going. The Star Drifter moved steadily toward the coordinates of the distress signal. The alien voices had become clearer as he got closer, and the translation computer was learning their language faster now. It had identified at least 12 different speakers, including what sounded like children. Their voices were higher and softer than the adults, but just as scared. When his sensors finally detected something ahead, Han Wu felt his breath catch in his throat. The alien ship was massive, much bigger than anything humans had ever built. It looked like someone had grown it instead of constructing it. The hull curved and flowed like the surface of a giant sea creature, with smooth organic lines that seemed to pulse with faint light. Parts of the ship were clearly damaged. Dark scars ran along the hull where something had torn through the metal. Entire sections were missing, leaving gaping holes that showed the dark interior. The ship was drifting without power, tumbling slowly end over end like a wounded whale in the ocean of space. Han Wu activated his communication system and sent out a standard first contact message. It was a simple mathematical sequence that any intelligent species should recognize as artificial. The response came back immediately. A flood of alien words filled his speakers so fast that the translation computer could barely keep up. Gradually, the words began to make sense. The alien speaking had a calm voice despite the obvious stress. Someone who was used to solving problems and staying focused under pressure. The computer identified the speaker as an engineer named Taemin, who was apparently in charge of keeping the ship running. Taemin explained their situation in careful, simple words, as if he understood that his language was being translated. The ship belonged to a people called the Villani, who were fleeing from a war that had destroyed their home system. They were refugees carrying nearly 1,000 civilians to a new world where they hoped to start over, but they had been attacked by raiders who wanted to steal their supplies and technology. The raiders had destroyed the Villani military escort and then crippled the refugee ship. They took everything valuable and left the civilians to die slowly in space. The Villani had been broadcasting their distress signal for 3 weeks, hoping someone would hear them. Yunwu felt sick as he listened to the story. 1,000 people, men and women and children, all trapped in a dying ship. The raiders had not just robbed them, they had murdered them as surely as if they had used weapons. The only difference was that this death would be slow and cruel. He asked Taemin how much time they had left. The alien engineer was quiet for a long moment before answering. The life support systems were failing, and the ship was losing heat and air. Maybe 4 or 5 days if they were lucky, maybe less if something else broke down. The translation computer was working better now, and Han Wu could hear the exhaustion in Taemin's voice. The alien had probably been working without sleep for days trying to keep his people alive. He was smart and skilled, but he was fighting a losing battle. Against time and broken machinery, Hyun-woo looked at his own small cargo ship and felt helpless. The Star Drifter could carry maybe 20 people if they packed in tight. There was no way he could evacuate 1,000 aliens, even if they were willing to trust him. His ship was designed for cargo hauling, not rescue operations, but he had to try something. He told Taemin that he wanted to help and asked if he could get detailed information about the alien ship systems. Maybe there was a way to repair the damage or at least buy more time. The Villani engineer sounded surprised that a stranger would offer help, but he quickly agreed to share whatever information Hyun-woo needed. The data that came through the communication link was incredible. The Villani ship was not just big, it was like a floating city with multiple levels and districts the aliens had built it to carry their entire population to a new world. It had farms and workshops and schools and hospitals, everything needed to sustain life on a long journey through space. But the technology was completely different from anything humans used. The Villani power systems were based on something the translation computer called bioenergy. The ship was partially alive with living components that could repair themselves and adapt to new situations. It was beautiful and elegant, but also fragile, in ways that human engineers had never had to. Hyun-woo studied the technical readouts until his eyes hurt. The damaged sections were not just broken, they were dying. The living components of the ship were shutting down one by one like organs. Failing in a sick body, traditional human repair methods would not work here. The two technologies were too different. As he worked through the data, he began to hear other voices from the alien ship. Families talking quietly to each other, trying to stay calm for the sake of their children. Parents singing lullabies in the musical Villani language to help little ones sleep despite the fear. Old people sharing stories about their lost homeworld, trying to preserve memories that might otherwise be forgotten. One voice stood out from the others, a young Villani who spoke with the careful pronunciation of someone learning a new language. She was trying to practice human words that the translation computer had taught her. Her name was So-ra, and she wanted to thank the human who had answered their call for help. Hyun-woo felt tears in his eyes as he listened to So-ra stumble through simple phrases in his own language. She was probably just a child, but she was trying to reach out across the vast differences between their species to make a connection. He spoke back to her using simple words and heard her excited laughter when she understood him. The conversation with So-ra changed something in Hyun-woo's mind. These were not just aliens anymore, they were people, scared, hungry, desperate people who had lost everything and were facing death in the cold emptiness of space. They had families and hopes and dreams just like humans. Did they deserve to live? He began to form a plan. It was crazy and dangerous and would probably fail, but it was the only chance the Villani had. The mining equipment in his cargo hold was not designed for ship repair, but it was built to work in the harshest conditions imaginable. If he could find a way to adapt it, maybe he could create a temporary solution to keep the alien ship running. Taemin listened carefully as Hyun-woo explained his idea. The alien engineer asked many questions about human technology and seemed impressed by the modular design of the mining equipment. It was not compatible with Villani systems, but it might be possible to build some kind of bridge between the two technologies, working together across the language barrier and the vast differences in their engineering knowledge. The human and the alien began to design a hybrid solution. It would require Hyun-woo to physically board the alien ship and work alongside the Villani engineers. No human had ever set foot on an alien vessel before, but there was no other choice. As they worked through the technical details, Hyun-woo could hear the hope returning to Taemin's voice. The alien engineer was brilliant and creative, and he could see possibilities that Hyun-woo had missed. It would be dangerous and difficult, but it might actually work. The plan would take everything Hyun-woo had: his cargo, his ship, and possibly his life. But as he listened to the voices of the Villani families echoing through the communication link, he knew he had to try. 1,000 people were counting on him, and he would not let them down. Hyun-woo spent the next 18 hours studying every detail of the Villani ship systems that Taemin had sent him. The alien technology was unlike anything he had ever seen. Instead of metal and circuits, the ship used living tissue that could grow and adapt. The power flowed through organic channels that pulsed like veins, and the control systems responded to biological signals rather than electrical impulses. The Damage was worse than he had first thought. The raiders had not just broken the ship, they had poisoned it. The weapons they used had introduced toxins into the living systems, causing them to shut down and die. Large sections of the ship were already dead, and the poison was spreading to other areas like an infection, but Hyun Woo had an idea that might work. The mining equipment in his cargo hold was designed to work in toxic environments where ordinary machinery would fail. The fabrication units could create materials that were completely sterile and immune to biological contamination. If he could modify them properly, he might be able to create artificial organs to replace the dying parts of the ship. He explained his plan to Tae-min through the communication link. The alien engineer was quiet for a long time as he considered the proposal. It would mean cutting out the infected sections of the ship and replacing them with human technology. The two systems were so different that it should have been impossible to make them work together, but Tae-min was desperate enough to try anything. He began sending Hyun Woo detailed schematics of the ship vital systems, showing exactly where the damage was worst. The alien engineer had already identified the critical areas where repairs would make the biggest difference. The main power distribution center and the primary air recycling system were failing. Fast as Hyun Woo loaded his cargo bay with the mining equipment he would need and began modifying it for the rescue mission. The industrial fabricators were designed to create mining tools and habitat modules, but they were flexible enough to make other things. The power cells were built to last for decades in the harsh environment of asteroid mining operations. Working with Tae-min guidance, he began to design hybrid components that could interface between human and Vellani technology. It was like trying to connect a computer to a living brain. The electrical signals had to be converted to biochemical ones, and the timing had to be perfect, or the whole system would reject the artificial parts. The most difficult part was figuring out how to actually install the new systems. Hyun Woo would have to board the alien ship and work in an environment that might kill him. The Vellani breathed a different atmosphere, and their ship might contain diseases that human immune systems could not handle. He had never worn a spacesuit inside another ship before, but it might be the only way to stay. Olivia Tae-min assured him that the Vellani ship environment would be safe for humans. The aliens had studied the data from human space missions and determined that their atmospheres were compatible. Hyun Woo would be able to breathe their air without problems. The real danger was from the failing life support systems and the toxic contamination in the damaged areas. As they worked through the technical details, Hyun Woo began to hear more voices from the alien ship. Children were crying because they were cold and scared. Parents were trying to comfort them, but their own voices were full of fear. Old people were talking about the friends and family they had lost in the war that drove them from their home. One voice belonged to an elderly Vellani named Haewon, who seemed to be some kind of leader. Her voice was strong and calm, even though she was clearly worried about her people. She spoke to Hyun Woo directly, thanking him for his help and promising that the Vellani would never forget his kindness. Haewon explained more about what had happened to her people. The war had started when another alien species decided that the Vellani homeworld had resources they wanted. The invaders had superior weapons and numbers, but the Vellani had managed to evacuate most of their population before the planet fell. The refugee ship was carrying the survivors to a new world, where they hoped to rebuild their civilization, but the raiders who attacked them were not part of the invading army. They were criminals who preyed on refugees and displaced people. They would steal everything valuable and then leave their victims to die. It was a business to them, as cold and calculated as any other form of murder. Hyun Woo felt anger burning in his chest as he listened to Haewon's story. The raiders were not just thieves, they were monsters who killed innocent people for profit. The Vellani had already lost their home and most of their possessions. Now they were dying in space because criminals wanted to steal the few things they had left. The anger gave him energy and focus as he worked on the rescue plan. He loaded the modified mining equipment into his cargo shuttle and prepared to make the dangerous journey to the alien ship. Tae-min had identified a docking port that was still functional and could accommodate the smaller human vessel. The trip from the Star Drifter to the Vellani ship took only 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. The alien vessel grew larger and larger in the shuttle view screen until it filled the entire sky. The hull was covered with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living skin. Some sections glowed with soft bioluminescent light, while others were dark and dead. Taemin guided him to the docking port with precise instructions. The alien engineer had managed to restore power to the docking systems long enough to let the shuttle attach safely as the airlock sealed together. Henwu felt his heart pounding with nervousness. He was about to become the first human to board an alien ship. The airlock opened with a soft hiss and warm air flowed into the shuttle. It smelled strange, like flowers and ocean water mixed together, but it was not unpleasant. Henwu took a deep breath and stepped through the doorway into the alien ship. The corridor beyond was unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls curved overhead in a smooth arch that seemed to pulse with faint light. The floor was soft under his feet, like walking on living tissue. The air was warm and humid, and he could hear the distant sound of voices echoing through the ship. Taemin was waiting for him just inside the airlock, and Hyunwoo got his first look at one of the Villani. The alien was tall and slender, with long, graceful limbs and skin that shifted color from pale blue to deep purple. The face was vaguely humanoid, but with larger eyes and more delicate features despite their obvious differences. Hyunwoo could see intelligence and desperate hope in Taemin's eyes. The alien engineer gestured for him to follow, and they began walking through the ship toward the damaged areas. The corridors were filled with Villani families huddled together for warmth. Many of them stared at Hyunwoo with curiosity and wondered he was probably the first human they had ever seen. As they walked, Taemin explained the layout of the ship and pointed out the areas where the repairs were needed most. The main power center was 3 levels down, and the air recycling system was spread throughout the ship. Both systems were failing rapidly, and there was no time to waste. Hyunwoo began unloading his equipment and setting up the fabrication units in the ship engineering section. The hybrid components would have to be built on site and installed quickly before the existing systems failed completely. It was going to be the most challenging repair job of his life, but he was determined to save these people. Working side by side with Taemin, he began the delicate process of connecting human technology to alien biology. The two engineers came from completely different worlds, but they shared the same goal: keeping the ship and its passengers alive. The first thing that struck Hyunwoo about the Villani ship was how alive it felt. The corridor seemed to breathe around him, with walls that pulsed gently like a sleeping giant. The bioluminescent panels overhead shifted from blue to green to purple, creating patterns that reminded him of aurora lights dancing across the night sky. Everything was designed for beings much larger than humans, and he felt like a child walking through a cathedral built for gods. Taemin led him deeper into the ship, pointing out the different sections. As they walked, the engineering areas were filled with organic machinery that looked more like the inside of a living creature than any technology Hyunwoo had ever seen. Tubes and channels carried glowing fluids that served as both power and information networks. The whole system was elegant and beautiful, but also fragile in ways that human technology was not. As they worked their way toward the damaged sections, Hyunwoo began to encounter other Villani. The aliens were indeed much larger than humans, with most adults standing nearly 3 meters tall. Their skin changed color to reflect their emotions, and he could see the fear and desperation in the dark blues and purples that rippled across their faces. But despite their obvious worry, the Villani treated him with gentle respect and overwhelming gratitude. They would bow their heads slightly when they saw him and speak soft words that the translation computer rendered as thanks and blessings. Some of the younger ones stared at him with wide eyes full of curiosity. They had never seen a human before, and he was as strange to them as they were to him. The ship was organized into different districts. Just like a city, there were residential areas where families lived in curved chambers that looked like giant flower petals. There were workshop areas where skilled craftsmen created beautiful objects from living materials. There were even garden areas where the Villani grew food in chambers filled with soft light and moist air, but many of these areas were dark and cold now. The failing life support systems had forced the Villani to abandon whole sections of the ship. Families had crowded together in the few areas that still had heat and air. Children huddled close to their parents, wrapped in blankets and shivering despite the warm clothing the Villani wore. One of the children approached Hyunwoo as he worked on installing the first fabrication unit. She was small even for a Villani child with pale skin that shifted from white to pale pink as she watched him work. Her name was Sora, and she was the young voice. He had heard practicing human words over the communication system, so Ra offered him a small crystal that glowed. With soft blue light, it was beautiful and warm to the touch, and Taemin explained that it was a friendship token among the Villani people. Young ones would give them to adults they trusted and respected. Hyun-woo carefully placed the crystal in his pocket and smiled at the little girl. Her skin brightened to a happy golden color as the hours passed. Hyun-woo found himself becoming more comfortable working alongside the Villani engineers. They were brilliant and creative, able to understand human engineering concepts, even though they thought about technology in completely different ways. Where humans built machines, the Villani grew them. Where humans used electricity and circuits, the Villani used biological processes and living chemistry. The hybrid system they were creating was unlike anything either species had built before. The human fabrication units provided the raw materials while the Villani bioengineers shaped them into forms that could interface with the ship living systems. It was like building a bridge between two completely different ways of understanding. The Université Min proved to be not just intelligent but also patient and kind. He never showed frustration when Hyun-woo made mistakes or misunderstood something about Villani technology. Instead, he would carefully explain the concepts using simple words and gestures. The language barrier was getting smaller as they worked together, and soon they were communicating almost as easily as if they spoke the same language. The real breakthrough came when they successfully connected the first hybrid power cell to the ship main distribution system. The organic channels had been dying from the toxins introduced by the Raider weapons, but the artificial components provided clean power that the living systems could use. The bioluminescent panels in the surrounding corridors began to glow brighter, and warmer air started flowing through the ventilation systems. Cheers echoed through the ship as the Villani realized that the repairs were actually working. Families began returning to areas that had been abandoned, and children started playing in corridors that had been dark and cold. The improvement was small, but it was real progress, and it gave everyone hope that they might actually survive. Hyun-woo met more of the Villani as he worked through the ship. An elderly engineer named Min-ho, who had helped design the original biosystems, a teacher named Ji-woo, who was trying to keep the children educated. Despite their desperate situation, a doctor named Soo-jin, who was treating people who had been injured when the raiders attacked each of them, had stories to tell about the war that had driven them from their home, about the beautiful world they had lost and the friends and family who had died in the fighting, about the long journey through space and the hope that they might find a new place to live in peace. But they also asked questions about humans and Earth. They wanted to know about human families and human children, about human art and music and literature. They were fascinated by the idea that another species had evolved intelligence and technology, even though they had developed along completely different paths. Jae-won, the elderly leader, spent several hours talking with Hyun-woo while he worked on the air recycling systems. She was wise and thoughtful, with a way of speaking that reminded him of his own grandmother back on Earth. She talked about what this moment meant for both species. She said that first contact between intelligent species was supposed to happen through diplomats and scientists with careful protocols and formal ceremonies, but instead it was happening because one person had heard a call for help and decided to answer. It was not the kind of first contact that anyone had planned for, but it might be the most important kind. The Villani had legends about other intelligent species in the galaxy, but they had never encountered any before. The humans were proof that they were not alone in the universe, that intelligence and compassion could evolve in different forms on different worlds. It gave her hope that there might be other species out there who would help refugees and displaced people. As they worked through the night, Hyun-woo realized that he was not just repairing a ship, he was helping to save an entire civilization. The Villani were not just individuals, they were the last representatives of their culture and their way of life. If they died here in space, then everything they had built and learned and created would be lost forever. The hybrid life support system was working better than anyone had dared hope. The combination of human technology and Villani bioengineering was creating something that neither species could have achieved alone. The ship was still damaged, and there was still work to do. But the immediate crisis was over, but more importantly, the collaboration was creating something else entirely, a friendship between species that had never met before, a sharing of knowledge and culture that was already changing how both humans and Villani thought about the universe. The technical success was just the beginning of something much more significant as the ship life support system stabilized and the Villani began to move back into areas that had been abandoned. Hanamu felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with engineering or technology. He had helped save 1,000 lives, but he had also helped forge a connection between two species that might last for generations. The work was not finished yet, but the worst was over. The Villani would survive and their culture would continue. And somewhere in the galaxy there would always be the story of the human who heard their call for help and came to their aid when no one else would. The temporary repairs had bought them time, but Hyenwu knew it was not enough. The hybrid life support system was working, but it was pushed to its limits, supporting nearly 1,000 Villani. The ship was stable for now, but it could not make the long journey to a safe world without more extensive modifications. They needed a permanent solution, and they needed it fast. Hyenwu stared at the technical readouts showing the strain on the improvised systems. The human fabrication units were working harder than they had ever been designed to work. The Villani biosystems were adapting to the artificial components, but the integration was imperfect. There were bottlenecks and inefficiencies that would only get worse over time. He made a decision that surprised even himself. He was going to cannibalize his own ship, the Star. Drifter had been his home and his livelihood for 3 years, but these people needed it more than he did. The cargo vessel had expansion capabilities that most ships lacked, modular systems that could be removed and reconfigured for different purposes. Min was shocked when Hyenwu explained his plan. The alien engineer understood what the human was offering. To sacrifice his ship was not just a machine. It was his freedom and his way of life. Without it, Hyenwu would be stranded wherever the Villani ship eventually landed. He would be giving up everything to help people he had known for only a few days, but Hyenwu had made up his mind. The Star Drifter had been built with expansion ports and modular components that could be rearranged for different cargo loads. The mining equipment in his hold was designed to work together as a complete industrial system. If he could attach additional modules to the outside of the Villani ship, he could create a much more robust life support network. The plan was ambitious and dangerous. They would need to essentially rebuild parts of both ships while they were flying through space. The work would have to be done in vacuum suits outside the hull, where one mistake could be fatal. But it was the only way to create a system that could support the Villani population for the months it would take to reach a safe world. Working with Taemin and a team of skilled Villani engineers, Hyenwu began the process of dismantling his cargo ship. The Star Drifter had served him well, but now it would serve a greater purpose. The power cores and life support modules and fabrication units were all carefully removed and prepared for installation on the alien vessel. The process was like performing surgery on both ships at the same time. The Villani engineers had to modify their biosystems to accept the human components, while Hyenwu figured out how to make his technology work in the alien environment. It was the most complex engineering project that either species had ever attempted. As they worked, word spread through the ship about what the human was doing. Villani, who had never met him before, came to the engineering sections to watch the progress. They brought food and drink and small gifts to show their appreciation. Some of the older ones told stories about their homeworld and the great works of engineering that had been built there. The children were especially fascinated by the human technology. They had never seen machines that were built instead of grown, and they asked endless questions about how the fabrication units worked. Sora became his unofficial assistant, bringing him tools and helping to organize the smaller components. Her curiosity and enthusiasm reminded him of his own sister when she was young. Haewon spent hours talking with Hyenwu about the implications of what they were building. The hybrid technology was more than just a life support system. It was a symbol of what two species could accomplish when they worked together. The Villani had bioengineering skills that humans had never imagined, while humans had developed modular construction techniques that could be applied to any problem. The work was exhausting and dangerous, but it was also exhilarating. Hyenwu found himself learning new ways to think about engineering problems. The Villani approach to technology was organic and adaptive, while the human approach was logical and systematic. When they combined the two methods, they could solve problems that neither could handle. Alone, one of the most challenging aspects was creating the interface between the human power systems and the Villani bio networks. The electrical energy had to be converted into the biochemical processes that the alien technology used. The conversion was not perfect, and there were losses at every step, but the hybrid system was still more efficient than either technology alone. The breakthrough came when Minho, the elderly Villani engineer, suggested using living conduits to carry the converted energy. The biosystems could adapt to the electrical input and transform it into the forms that the ship needed. It was like teaching the ship to eat electricity instead of the organic compounds it had been designed to use as. The new systems came online one by one. The ship began to transform the corridors that had been dark and cold, filled with warm light and fresh air. The residential areas that had been abandoned became livable again. Families started returning to their own chambers, and children began playing in the common areas. The hybrid technology was creating something that was more than the sum of its parts. The human components provided reliability and efficiency, while the Villani biosystems added adaptability and self-repair capability. The ship was becoming stronger and more resilient than it had ever been, even before the raider attack. But the real success was not just technical, it was social and cultural. The humans and Villani, working together, had created bonds that went beyond mere cooperation. They had become friends and teachers and partners in a shared endeavor. The language barriers were breaking down as both species learned to communicate not just with words but with gestures and shared understanding. Yinwu realized that he was not just helping to save the Villani, he was helping to create the foundation for a relationship between two species that could last for generations. The technical knowledge they were sharing would benefit both humans and Villani for centuries to come, but more importantly, they were proving that different species could work together despite their differences. The modified life support system was working better than anyone had dared hope. The ship could now support its population indefinitely, and even had capacity for growth. The Villani would not just survive, they would thrive on their journey to a new world. And when they arrived, they would carry with them the knowledge and friendship of another species. As the work neared completion, Haiyan Wu felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The Star Drifter was gone, cannibalized to save the alien ship, but its components lived on in the hybrid systems that now sustained 1,000 lives. He had given up his old life, but he had gained something far more valuable. The Villani were no longer just aliens, they were his friends and colleagues and partners in an adventure that had changed both of their species forever. The galaxy had become a larger and more wonderful place, and all it had taken was one person willing to answer a call for help. The ship was ready to continue its journey to a new world, but first there was one more thing that needed to be done. The human authorities needed to be contacted and told about what had happened. First contact between species was too important to be kept secret. The galaxy was about to become a very different place. The hybrid life support system had been running perfectly for 2 weeks when Han Wu finally made contact with human authorities. The signal took 3 days to reach the nearest human outpost and another day for the response to come back. When it did, the reaction was exactly what he had expected: shock, disbelief, excitement, and 1,000 questions that he could not answer quickly enough. Admiral Park at the Colonial Defense Force was the first official to speak with him. The military leader was professional but clearly overwhelmed by the implications of what Haiyan Wu was reporting. First contact with an alien species was supposed to be handled by trained diplomats and scientists, not by a cargo pilot who had stumbled into the situation by accident. But as Haiyan Wu explained what had happened and introduced Taemin and Haewon over the communication link, the Admiral began to understand that this was not a typical first contact scenario. The Villani were not a potential threat or a mysterious alien civilization. They were refugees who needed help and had already formed bonds with the human who had saved them. The news spread quickly through human space, and the reaction was immediate. A fleet of ships was dispatched to meet the Villani vessel. Scientists and diplomats and medical teams all wanted to be part of this historic moment. The military sent escorts to make sure the alien ship would be safe from any other raiders who might be in the area, but the most important Response came from ordinary human citizens who heard about the rescue and wanted to help. Donations poured in from across human space. Money and supplies and offers of sanctuary for the Villani refugees, people who had never seen an alien before, were moved by the story of families fleeing from war and finding hope through the kindness of strangers. The journey to the human system where the Villani would be relocated took 6 weeks. The hybrid ship performed flawlessly during the trip. The combination of human and Villani technology had created something that was more reliable and efficient than either species could have built alone. The biosystems adapted to new conditions while the mechanical components provided steady power and life support during the long journey. Haiyan Wu had time to see how the collaboration between humans and Villani was changing both species. The engineers were sharing techniques and knowledge that would advance both technologies. The doctors were learning about alien biology and medicine. The teachers were developing new ways to communicate across species barriers. Sora had become fluent in human language and was teaching other Villani children to speak it. She had also started teaching Haiyan Wu the beautiful flowing script that the Villani used for writing. Their language was musical and poetic in ways that human languages were not, and it gave him a new appreciation for how different species could express the same idea. One spent many hours with Haiyan Wu discussing the future of human-Villani relations. She was wise enough to understand that this first contact would shape how both species interacted for generations to come. The rescue had started with one person helping strangers, but it had grown into something much larger. The elderly Villani leader talked about the concept of galactic citizenship, the idea that intelligent species had responsibilities to each other that went beyond their own worlds. The universe was vast and dangerous, and species that worked together would be stronger and safer than those that remained isolated. When the human rescue fleet finally arrived, the meeting was unlike anything that had ever happened in galactic history. Instead of formal ceremonies and diplomatic protocols, there was a celebration. Humans and Villani working together to transfer supplies and equipment. Families greeting the medical teams that would help them adjust to their new world. Children playing games that mixed human and Villani traditions. The Villani ship had become a symbol of cooperation and hope. The hybrid technology was studied by scientists from both species who were amazed by what could be accomplished when different approaches to engineering were combined. The biosystems and mechanical components worked together in ways that neither species had imagined. Possibly Min was selected to serve as the first Villani ambassador to human space. His experience working with Haiyan Wu had given him unique insights into how the two species could collaborate. He would help establish the protocols and procedures that would govern future interactions between humans and Velanith. Rescue had also changed human perspectives on space exploration. The galaxy was no longer empty and hostile, but full of possibilities for cooperation and discovery. The story of the Villani refugees had inspired a new generation of humans to look beyond their own system and think about their place in the larger universe. For Haiyan Wu, the experience had been transformative. He was no longer just a cargo pilot hauling equipment between worlds. He had become a bridge between species, a living symbol of what one person could accomplish when they chose to help others. The human government offered him positions in the diplomatic service or the exploration corps, but he had other plans. He decided to stay with the Villani and help them establish their new colony. The hybrid ship would become the foundation for their first settlement, and Han Wu would help them adapt their technology to work in their new environment. The knowledge he had gained about bioengineering would be invaluable as they built their new civilization. The colony world was beautiful, with vast oceans and continents covered in forest that reminded the Villani of their lost home. The hybrid technology allowed them to create settlements that were both efficient and harmonious with the natural environment. The human modular construction techniques combined with Villani bioengineering created buildings that could grow and adapt to changing needs. As the first permanent structures were completed and families began to settle into their new homes, Han Wu realized that he had found his true calling. He was not just helping to build a colony, he was helping to create a model for how different species could live and work together. The success of the Villani colony inspired other human settlements to adopt similar hybrid technologies. The combination of mechanical reliability and biological adaptability proved to be superior to either approach. Alone trade and cultural.